All right. Good morning to Justin. Now it's afternoon for me, mate, but good morning to you, and welcome to the podcast.
David, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
So, mate, now I take it. I didn't even ask before I got on, but you're in the UK at the moment, aren't you? Because every time I talk to you, you're in a different spot, are you?
Yeah, I'm in the UK at the moment, where the sunshine started to come out behind the thick layer of cloud. No doubt, a bunch of farmers here in the UK will be complaining about drought by this afternoon because it hasn't rained since yesterday, it's a reasonable spot. My family's over here, and I've been here for about 6 months now.
Oh, very good. Are you urban UK or semi-rural or?
Well, I'm out in the countryside, thank goodness, it's rural England's probably a little different from what we all know and love in country Australia.
Now you do have a connection to country Australia, though. So, so now we're going to talk about a whole lot of stuff today. But I just want to, when people are listening to the podcast, I want to who the hell is Justin Webb and why am I talking to him? And one of the
quite right, they should be switching off now.
Stick with us, people. Okay, I'm going to tell you about Justin Webb, right? So now, mate, I stalked you on the internet. Now, when we had a chat, I didn't go into this, but I went and stalked you on the internet, mate. And you seem like a bit of a serial entrepreneur, right? So you did the whole. Now you did. Now, if I got it right, you did maths and econs at Harvard, yeah, and then you did MBA or something at Oxford. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, my memory is probably as fuzzy as your retelling, but yeah, applied mathematics at Harvard, and then
Oxford, Harvard. A bit of a flex there, mate, but
all the labels,
all labels, mate. But now I found it more interesting. You did startups in or soft companies in quantitative hedge fund stuff, like with and some capital advisory work and retail clients for some big investment banks like BlackRock, Macquarie, people like that, right? So how did you go from that very what I call Atlantic / hedge fund / funding sort of background to really Agri-Tech in Australia? And why the leap from that world to essentially what you're doing now, very successfully, might I add?
Well, I think you're very kind, and you're setting me up to horribly underwhelm your listeners. But I'm very appreciative to any of those that are listening out there. So yeah, I did. When my old man and his whole side of the family had been farming in Australia since 1850s in Western Queensland, on Camongan and other big properties out there that have a lot of storied history in our Aussie pastoral backgrounds. And Dad had left the farm. He was born in Jerilderie, around the Echuca area, played footy for Conago, and his career took him overseas, or took us overseas. Okay. And so when I turned up several years later, he was working for a big American conglomerate that meant that we moved country almost every 2 years, and so I got put in boarding school in England, thus the Pommy accent. That took me on this journey of education in the States and in England. But yeah, I kind of took that and almost immediately after graduation, I moved back to Australia. I kicked off, I guess, an entrepreneurial journey, as you'd mentioned, founding a couple of businesses in finance, asset management. But it was basically, to be honest, I haven't sort of admitted this before, but I really wasn't that keen on finance, as it were. And in particular, hedge funds, there's not a great kind of delivery, is there? It's great. Let's make loaded people more loaded. Isn't the most inspiring thing when you're going to bed at night. And what happened was Dad got sick, and I had found myself at our family farm, or one of the places that he had, and I'm sitting at the kitchen table being asked to make serious impacting decisions, as we all have through succession, about pasture improvement, fencing, livestock husbandry, and we were sort of getting a bit of advice here and there around the table, and I was poking and prodding, having not grown up on farm, but loving it and visiting it regularly, saying, all right, if we're going to make these investments in whatever it might be, that pasture quality, the genetic improvement, what is the expected outcome? What are we going to see out of this? Because my math trained brain was insistent on trying to look at this from a quantitative investment perspective. And I actually remember, I won't name it on this podcast because some of the listeners or he'll be listening himself, sort of leant across the table as his advisor and ruffled my hair and was like, oh, young buck, farming doesn't work like your spreadsheets. We just, it's more a rule of thumb. And I sort of thought about this and I was like, well, why? Why are you asking me to make, commitments of capital and decisions about profitability and investment off the base of, well, I hope she works out, like she'll be right. And there's all this technology out there, and this was about a decade ago, and it was just at the time when smartphones were really proliferating, networks and Wi-Fi was genuinely coming to the rural space, even though there's a fair way to go, but this was at the early days. And it's like, well, hang on, every other industry has seen software come in to help people manage, understand their business and make data-driven decisions. Why are we not seeing this in our area of sheep and beef production? And so, I'm perhaps admitting ignorance here, but that's the origin story of AgriWebb. It was, I was basically trying to make sense of some personal family decisions of how we invested on our own farm.
Do you think it's ag? You were, because there's an assumption, if you'd grown up on that farm, there would be an assumption that you just know, and that this to quote that consultant, you just know the rule of thumb, Justin, you know what to do, But does that hide what you've actually uncovered and the fact that the value of actually data-driven decisions on farm?
I think, look, people very much like to either position, tech is it's either the savior or a failure, right? And I just think that that's wrong. Like, the rule of thumb and experience and multi-generational growing up on the land is incredibly valuable. That's how people have done it for generations, for centuries. That's how we fed the growing population. So to say, the rule of thumb is silly, it's just, that's ignorant. But the fact is, the rule of thumb does work, and that experience means, you can learn each harvest, or you can learn each lambing or calving cycle, and those cycles are pretty slow. And the advantage to technology and data-driven decisions is, one, you have a much more accurate record of what you have done and what was the resulting impact of that decision. And you can look back and say, well, I made this decision and therefore the impact was this. And what's becomes really exciting is you can aggregate a lot of those decisions over many years and actually experiment to look at, well, what if I made those decisions? What if I took that action? What if I changed that feed? What if I increased the pasture carrying capacity? And I think that is what technology is great at. It's aggregating that data and helping you as the producer, have actionable insights so that you can speed up the improvement of your productivity. It's not going to fundamentally change, the way you're not going to have drones flying around and lambing down for you. You're not going to yes, there's satellites, but even though that measurement has a long way to go to catch up with, if I stand in the paddock and I look down, how much pasture is there and what is my carrying capacity? So tech isn't sort of this wonderful Superman savior, but it is an incredibly powerful and valuable help when you're making these really impactful decisions.
Yeah, and I was reading actually an author from the States the other day, and he was talking about the view of technology from the point of view, because we always tend to get excited or in dread of whatever the current technologies of the day. So at the moment, everyone's either, AI, they're either getting really frothy, excited about it, or they think it's the end of the world. And he was saying that if you go back and look at different periods of time, you could almost read exact word for word the same comments about books and about anything else, right? And he goes, so all these and what he was mentioning was all of these techs have the same thing: the human capacity, and that humans have always used tech to store information so they don't have to keep it all in their brain. So it was this idea, and then it allows you to think about other things. So you get that all that information about farming in your case, and you store it somewhere else, and then you can, it's almost like you're storing your memory. And this is what books and computers and technology have always done: is stored memory, so you can go back and analyze it, but you're not having, because the human brain just can't aggregate it all perfectly. And it was this idea, and they said that's what allows the human society to progress, is because you don't have to keep that one piece of information in your brain. You can store it and then go on to think about other things or share it with other people. So it was a really interesting perspective around that.
I mean, I love that. I think it is an interesting perspective, and let's bring that back, to our own world in agriculture. So where I'm sitting right now, you asked if I'm in the country. About 100 meters to my left is the farm where Jethro. Actually, I'll test your knowledge here, David, live. You might edit this out before it goes, but do you know if I said Jethro Tull? What did Jethro Tull invent that changed the world?
Jethro Tull invented the plow, or the mobile plow, or something like that. Is that?
Yeah, I'll give you about four out of 5 for that. That's pretty good. Jethro Tull in 1701, he invented the seed drill, and he did it right here on the phone next door called Prosperous. And before that, it was ox and plow, sowing seeds by hand, scattering on the ground. Which, by the way, an interesting aside, is the definition of an acre, was the amount of land that could be plowed with one ox and one plow between sun up and sundown. But anyway, I digress. But so Jethro Tull, right, looks at an organ and goes, well, wow, I can adapt that technology like a church organ. I can look at how the pipes play, and I think I can use that as a technology to more efficiently and faster plant seeds. That mechanized the ability to start to plant seeds and change the face of the world, right? The ability to plant so efficiently, so quickly, the ability, therefore, that actually kicked off the Industrial Revolution. Now, fast forward a couple of centuries, and in Australia, we are the only country in the world, in Australia, that has an Agri-Tech pioneer on our currency. David Unipon invented the shearing machine, which is effectively, it hasn't changed much, the handpiece.
They got right.
In 1914, I think it was. And there he is. That's pretty great, right? That we all know what that did to Australia's position in the world. The riches and the influence off the back of the sheep was globally impactful. And but again, this was just a tool. It didn't suddenly change what we did with animals. What it meant was we could be more efficient, like using technology to harvest the wool from the sheep. And I think the reason why I use some of these examples through history is history repeats itself. We all know that from all being in agriculture. It's pretty stupid if you start ignoring history. And so, about 10 years ago, everyone was red hot talking about paddock to plate, farm to fork, traceability. They were all, no one could utter a sentence without this being, it's going to be the future. You've got to track everything. Otherwise, you're left out in the cold. Well, I'm not sure I've heard that much about farm to fork recently. And as you say, it's AI and who knows what will be next. But I think the point about this repeating history is that there have been massive leaps forward, jumps, when technology comes, whether it's the seed drill, whether it is the shearing machine, and I think that the jump forward that we're seeing at the moment is around data. It's about capturing your data and then having actionable insights. It's not going to, transform you and take you off your land. What it's going to do is make it more productive. And we need to make it more productive because we're all told we need to produce more with less with a lower footprint, right? And by the way, make it cheaper. And that's a pretty tough challenge to all of us who are in primary production. And what I hope AgriWebb is, and what I hope AgriWebb can be, is one small piece of helping producers, analyze their own information, have actionable insights to produce better quality, more productive animals, and do so in a more sustainable way.
Technology addresses.
Yeah.
I always have people always go, "Are you worried about the future, in particular, climate change or whatever the current existential crisis at the moment?" And my answer is, I have this incredible faith in the human capacity to really address challenge given it enough incentive. Now, at the moment, there's another challenge. If you and I were at a conference at Ag in February, I think it was, and you couldn't go to one speaker and you wouldn't hear the words ESG, carbon, environmental. That was like, it just oozed through the 2 days of the conference, right? So, and you had. But
I like your word there. Oozed, slithered.
It's like
what is snake?
I go onto LinkedIn, I have someone's post about something to agriculture. I can swear they're going to say ESG in that sentence somewhere, right? So, but this is, but from a grower's point of view, they're thinking, okay, how am I going to deal with this? This is just another thing I have to do. It's, it was payroll last year. This year it's environmental, governance. But as this tech, like yours and ours and other people's, is this really about just helping, address that particular thing? And is this something that we're just going to have to leverage whatever tools we have to address? And you're dealing with that all over the world, really.
So look, I think it's a great question. It's not a short answer. Let me break it down into a couple different bits, and hopefully, hopefully there's something useful in there.
So you're dealing with growers all around the world, and I think you've got, I don't know how many growers you got on the books, but a lot. And you're dealing with suppliers. I'm not suppliers. With people who are a commodity buying these commodities, whether they be supermarkets or acquirers of things, and they have particular requirements. So the challenges within the supply chain that are having to be addressed now, and as supply, and people are looking for solutions for.
Yeah. So let me start with this. I think if you are, whether it's with AgriWebb or any other, use, even in spreadsheets, like the data that you produce, that you record on farm is your data. It's your information. And I think that has to be a central tenet of all of this discussion. And I think producers rightfully are wary, and they should be, right? Look what's happening with all of us around the world with Facebook and Google and et cetera. Like, if we're not paying for it, we're the product. So let's make sure that, you pay for it, you own it, and great. Therefore, you are empowered to do with that data what you wish. As in, it's incumbent on the ag tech company, the AgriWebbs, to say, hey, I can open up a channel for commercial advantage for you, and you will be rewarded for sharing your data. And that can be true in all kinds of different facets, whether you're sharing financial data, production data, animal health and treatment data, all of this stuff. My advice is, by digitizing your records, that empowers an increase in production on your farm, within your farm gate, but then it unlocks all sorts of opportunities in the future. Now, let's step into one of those opportunities that you're talking about, which is sustainability. And you're right. Okay, that's on everyone's lips and everyone's red hot about it, and they're running around like a fly in a bottle. And I stood up actually at the conference that you and I were at Ag, and my big contention is sustainability can be either a stick or a carrot. And at the moment, there's a big onus to, as you say, producers, hey, record your footprint, and you need to reduce or mitigate that footprint because that's going to be, table stakes, and it's just going to be another cost, push down on that producer. And I'm saying, actually, I think that's wrong. And I think and people will make an excuse and say, oh, but you can turn around and go sell your carbon credits. I don't think that's right, because the real value of sustainability is actually being captured at the retail end. It's at the Woolworths, the Coles, the McDonald's, it's at that retailer end where they can represent not just to the consumer, oh, Mr. and Mrs. Consumer wants to have a better understanding of their carbon footprint, they want to reduce their impact, all those sort of things. But the more nuanced and the less talked about bit is the corporate has to report. Increasingly, regulations require that corporate to report on what they call their Scope 3 emissions. Now, Scope 3 emissions is just a fancy way of saying, what's your emission from the farm, right? In food, it's what's your emissions on your farm. And that Scope 3 is by far and away the biggest proportion of insert your retail, like Woolies or Coles or McDonald's or etc. The biggest proportion of their environmental footprint comes from Scope 3, i.e. emissions on farm. Okay, fine. Now, you're the producer. You have now captured the information that relates to your emissions on farm, and you can undertake actions to mitigate that, right? Rotational grazing, smaller pastures, faster to wait, genetic improvements, you name it. You're the producers that are listening here. You know how you can make your business more productive. And as an aside, by the way, we're amazing in agriculture because increased productivity can be totally synonymous. It can be exactly the same as increased sustainability if done right. And I think that is very unique. So where am I getting to here? There's a big debate out in the sphere around offsets versus insets, sell your carbon credits versus get paid for insets. And the frustration in Australia, I think, is that the corporates have not come to the table and said, yup, we will pay you producers for insets. And so farmers are kind of almost being forced more to look at what are these carbon credits and how do I take advantage of them or how can I sell them? And I think that is, if I really step back, right, a carbon credit is kind of like a license to pollute, right? Shell or BHP buys a carbon credit and then just keeps polluting what it was doing. Well, that doesn't sound great. So how do we instead take what is within the supply chain of food production, i.e., the methane production from cattle, and how do we increase, right, the biodiversity in the soil? How do we increase pasture growth rates so that they recapture and sequester a lot of that methane and carbon back into the plant and the soil base? And if you can demonstrate, because you're a farmer, because you're a producer, because you're recording that data yourself, if you can show that you have implemented practices that reduce that footprint, and therefore you are helping the Woolies, the Coles, the McDonald's to have a lower carbon footprint, then you get paid for that. That is fair. That is the fair reality of it. And this isn't just me hoping or wishing that something comes true. You mentioned that AgriWebb through, I would say, hopefully a bit of skill, but mostly luck, we've bumbled into being, pretty big. We've got more than 23 million head around the world on our platform. We've got more than 30% of all of the grazed livestock in Australia is managed on AgriWebb, more than 150 million acres globally. So we have got a big footprint, and we've just signed some of the world first contracts to get McDonald's to pay the producers of their beef in the United States for supplying the data and lowering their carbon footprint. They are paying them. It's not a carbon offset. They are being paid to do the production that they're doing efficiently and sustainably. And we've got all of these other corporates that are coming to the table, big major global brands that are willing to do this as well. This is Mars, this is Nestle, this is Tyson, this is OSI, major groups. And if there's one message that listeners are going to take away, it's the empowering position that capturing your data and then knowing what it's worth, not necessarily just selling it as a carbon credit or answering that phone call from a carbon credit sort of producer or project manager, but look at what we can do when we are empowered with this with corporates. and it's helping those corporates and helping you. And I just think it's a much better equitable share across the supply chain. It's always been this producer must fight, processor must fight, retailer. But this is a situation where there's a rising tide that can lift all the boats, and it's only fair that everyone gets shared
had a
right the way
podcast,
through that supply chain.
Will be released soonish, but I don't know when this one's going to be released. But it was a Georgie Ellie, and she's a partner at KPMG, and obviously works with a lot of these big players. And one of the things that the conversation is this concept, and you almost explained it perfectly. And this concept of people have got to get rid of the concept of linear supply chains, and they're actually more circular now. So you as a grower at whatever scope, you have this data, you have this ability to record and manage this data, which means your whoever it is, your Woolworths, your Tesco's, even your CBH, your Grain Corps can now be a customer of yours as much as they're a customer of, instead of you just selling them grain, you might be selling them, information or data or capacity because they need to buy that off you. So it's this idea that these supply chains become more circular rather than just one direction. And I really like that idea. And I think you just nailed it right there in the capacity. So what you're trying to say is, as a grower, there's more than one reason. So recording data, like using an application like yours or just a spreadsheet to record the data you have on farm. Yes, you've got obviously the obvious ability to learn from what you've done in the past and increase production and efficiency and cost management and all those sorts of things. But there's this other leg of this, which is that data becomes really valuable to people within your supply chain or within your ecosystem of the farm as well, and to think about it in that context.
Yeah, and think about how, it's not that this is my job to turn around and come up with ideas to help you as a producer to say, hey, that information could be useful. But it's a two-way street. We there?
Yep. Are we still recording? Yep, we're recording. All right.
All right.
That worked. All right.
Well, we couldn't have a talk on tech without having tech fail, could we?
We were talking about that. We were at a meeting the other day, and someone said, you've got to ask the question. And we're on a Teams call, and I go, what's the question? It's the normal e-meeting call. Can you see the screen? And I go, can you imagine walking into a real meeting and go, can everyone see the screen?
Yeah, can everyone see me? Can you hear me? Yeah.
If you hear everyone, if you hear a break in the edit just there, it's just Justin just disappeared and the internet just, I don't know, did the internet thing. So yeah. It's tech.
Don't go bash your own computer. It was ours. So anyway, point I was trying to make is,
I'm just about to. What the hell's happening on the internet? Okay, all right, carry on.
Right. So the point I was making is, it's not unique, but it is AgriWebb's value is what we say right across the team, and we're now nearly 100 people, is that we live for the farmer, right? So we're engaging with the corporates. We are creating these, exciting ways to connect the farmer and their production information through to that. But we live for the farmer. And I think as long as ag tech generally holds that value really true, that it's going to be hard to go wrong, because what that means is you are staying close to the origin of where the data or data is being generated, and you're helping that sort of lowest part of where the margin is realized to actually lift in its value. And that is a two-way street, as I started to say before, because I want to hear from your listeners and all of the people in the ag tech sphere of, well, hang on, what are different ideas? Finance, right? You've got banks that drive down your driveway or are attached to your agent, and they might come and visit you once a year, or they'll take a look at your financial reports. But if you shared some of your information about your production, your inventory, your assets, and you're able to update that in real time, like what's the current yield out of your fields or your animals, right? That is making the balance sheet risk of that financial business way more efficient. And so they are getting a benefit, and therefore they should be able to give you a benefit, whatever that is, a cheaper loan rate, like a lower cost to your mortgage, a faster line of credit when you're standing in the yards, in the local sale yards, you want to buy some trade cattle, or all of these things. There's a back and forth symbiosis and we see symbiosis through nature, and we use it all the time, right, in our own production. So why shouldn't we be using it in data and tech and the exchange between big corporates and farmers?
And well, I have clients all the time, ask me, David, what does the bank want and everything? And I go, well, look, at the end of the day, you've got your job to do. They lend money at risk to me. They're like an investor, right? And if you look at you from their point of view, they're just trying to lower their risk on their investment in you. So if you are really good at managing that risk and updating them on that risk, well, then you're a better risk. So therefore, they don't have to charge you as much because you're less of a risk to them. So there's always been a value in that relationship, like you just mentioned, in, don't hide information because that just makes you scarier to them.
Well, if you hide information and don't think you're alone, all that's happening is that institution is going, well, I think they're hiding something, so let's just put an extra margin of what they might or might not be hiding. Versus if you're transparent, they know exactly what's going on, and they go, all right, fine, here's the price. And I think that's true not just in banking; it's true in a whole bunch of other things. We did an interaction very early on in AgriWebb days with Andrew Mason, who was running Bayer Animal Health. Mm-hmm. And we did this collaboration with Bayer and DSM. And look, my old man lost it. He was like, what are you doing talking to the animal health companies, etc. And the interesting thing there was, it wasn't about sharing anyone's production data. It was all they wanted to see was, what do you have in your inventory? And in return, they would input your batch numbers and they would reduce the cost of that treatment. Mm-hmm. And the operation actually, like, that collaboration went really well. It was exciting, created the GROW program. And, I think everyone on this program probably knows the story. Bayer Animal Health was then bought by whoever, Monsanto, and it's all gone into the meat grinder. But, it was a really good example of how a lot of producers came together to connect with these groups that normally you're standing at the front gate with the shotgun, and instead, by letting them in and having this collaboration, they got mutual benefit.
But I like that idea. But if you as a grower, so what you're saying is, you as a grower or a group of growers say, okay, we have this data, and we know to you, as whatever size company you are in the agri-food chain, it's valuable to you. This can help you manage production. It can help you manage compliance, whether it be carbon, whether it be production volumes, whether it be anything else.
Yep.
Can help you reduce whatever challenge you have as a company. If you can help us reduce, whether it be something as simple as the cost of inputs, or whether it be advice, because I know, I think we can probably get onto those bigger things, but I think the US is always somehow, because they've got those bigger entities, have always gone in and they've reached a bit deeper into the farmer pocket, like your Climate Corp, your Monsanto recipes, those sort of things. And I don't know if that was very collaborative, but that was an example of, okay, if you give us your data, we'll give you advisory on that data or something like that.
Okay, so now I'm going to get a bit contentious and I'll probably get in trouble. But I think that those, right, there are examples, unfortunately, in agriculture and ag technology where that data hasn't, as I used before, lived for the farmer. Those companies haven't lived for the farmer. And that is what is becoming, frankly, a really big challenge to a lot of the companies that, like ours, in this space, because trust is a difficult thing to build, and it's a quick thing to lose. And when Climate Corp was a company that was helping farmers better understand, predict weather, and better understand how to plant particular seeds and species so that they could grow more effective and more efficient output, great, love the idea. And it was really good. and then they sold for whatever it was, $1 billion to to big agribusiness. And then big agribusiness went, oh, hang on, I can now work out who's planting what, and I can charge them way more for it, and I can rake them over the. Now that, and I'm sorry for what I'm about to say, cover your ears if you're sensitive, but that's fucked. And it's not okay. It's not okay for the data that has been and the data relationship that has been entered into these companies and this relationship to suddenly be abused and be used. And what the term I use is it's weaponized, right? It to be weaponized back against the owners. And frankly, they didn't know it then, but we do now. Like if that relationship whereby if you've signed up to a company and you're exchanging information, you're recording information on it, that you have rights such that that information cannot and should not be weaponized against you legally. So I'm a big proponent of empowering the farmer, the primary producer, the owner of that data and information, that they have a right to not have this information be weaponized against them. And they have a right to only give allowances for what data is and is not, given over to these big corporates. Now, I think what's an interesting angle to step into here is, okay, but Climate Corp was an example of one of the great successes of AgTech from a commercial perspective, right? It was founded, it was a good idea, it scaled, and then it was bought for, tons of money, and investors did well, and farmers did well, and all this sort of stuff. Well, hang on. I think that what we have seen over the past, let's call it 15 years, is we are not, everyone likes to say that we're not any longer at the earliest stage, the nascent, the genesis of agricultural technology. Putting aside the comments that we said earlier about Jethro Tull and David Inapon, in the past 15 years or so, we've seen this massive surgence of particularly software and hardware, digital enabled tools, let's call it. And we're seeing them now, emerge with global leaders in different segments, right? There's no longer one tool that is everything to everyone. You've got a specific leader in almost each segment. But what's happening is a lot of the agri-businesses, the big ones, and I sound like I'm beating up on them, I don't. I just want them to recognize how to build their business better. They tend to buy these digital businesses when they're just getting to a scale and they go, oh, I know, my existing massive conglomerate sells chemicals to animals, or it sells feed to animals, or it sells seed to farmers, or it does whatever it does. And I'm going to use this digital conduit as a pathway to sell more of my existing product into those farmers. And I think that is fundamentally wrong from a concept, because when you look at the successful digital businesses out of Silicon Valley, like the biggest companies in the world now, they're not taking an old business model and thumping it through, right? They totally reinvented the way that, say, advertising arrives or how products are delivered. And so I think the reality is these big agribusinesses, which still should be the rightful sort of end point for a lot of these technologies, they need to embrace and invest in a digital platform for the sake of the digital platform itself, i.e. we will be able to sell, service, support these producers with hardware and software together that will make these producers more productive. And if they're more productive, they will end up using more of our product. They will end up feeding more around the world. And we will be able to lift the scale of our business because we will be making money from digital tools as well as our existing core business. And that, to me, is how you scale this.
And so what you're saying is they're going and getting these, and get a tech like yourselves or anyone else from a startup to that scale where you're going to be of interest to those companies is pretty hard work, and you've done pretty well to get there. But what you're saying is that a lot of these companies, because they are the next level of people who've got the balance sheets to acquire these companies, are then essentially buying this tech and then just, wrapping it up and saying, okay, only people who shop with me can use this tech now, or they're quarantining it somehow, or not investing in its growth beyond their own their own base? Is that sort of, so they're grabbing this tech and go, if you buy my XYZ, you can use this tech now, and they're sort of using it almost like a lost leader in marketing, almost, rather than a product in its own right.
Yeah, I mean, and let's put some of these things in scale. Like, Merck, for example, has a market cap of half 500 billion. It's $500 billion. You Cargill, Cargill would be worth what, 70 billion. And so I think they've got, what, 155,000 employees. So when you start looking at the scale of these businesses, of course they're the rightful home and the rightful owner and the rightful investor and the scaler of a lot of these technologies. But the caveat that I put on that is it needs to be done from the mindset of, I'm going to come back to it, live for the farmer, right? And how do we take these technologies and make sure that we are living for the farmer, so that we are empowering these producers, all of our producers globally, to use these technologies, be able to be more productive themselves, and then, like, that in and of itself helps us as a big business be more productive and drive the agriculture sector, rather than let me just thump more of my animal feed or chemical or whatever it is, right? Animal treatment or seed or fertilizer through the conduit of, well, XYZ platform, gives me a channel. And we've seen that a little bit, right? When Merck bought Antelic, the ear tag maker of all flags, right? They haven't yet been able to drive that digital angle, largely because they haven't been able to connect those data sources internally and then feed it back to the producer as actionable insights and information. And I think when they do that, gosh, that's going to be exciting. It's going to be really cool for the innovation of the industry. Conversely, and to give some credit here, Tyson has embraced, on the poultry side and on the swine side, working with groups like AgriTech, which is a great software that records a lot of information for poultry and swine. And they've been able to drive innovation particularly through the genetic improvement of feed conversion efficiencies. That has increased, the proof's in the pudding, right? What is it? The feed conversion efficiency of poultry over the past 75 years has increased 110x. And so, I think there are opportunities. And so I don't want to sound like I'm just, beating up on the corporates, because that's easy and lazy. I just think that there's an amazing opportunity right now for a lot of these corporates to embrace the technologies that have started to emerge as leaders and go, right, how do we work with you to deliver benefit back to the producer, but also realize growth of our own business?
So if I'm a producer, so we're getting this interesting combination. So a lot of people listening today are going to be producers, and they're seeing, like you and I. So you and I have been doing this a long enough time to see 1,000 new agri-tech startups and disappear. They're like, it's hard. You go there and there's a whole lot of young, exciting people doing some exciting stuff, and some of them are producers themselves. And a year later, none of them are there. You've got a message there that all for the farmer or whatever. So is there just a core, you've done this, you've taken something from an idea around a kitchen table on the farm and turned it into this, $30, $40 million sort of enterprise, right? So what's the key there? So what is one of the, I want to start from an agri-tech. I've got a farmer question as well, but the agri-tech. So these people are sitting there going, okay, I've got an idea. What do you think is contributing to this really high attrition rate within ag? Because farmers don't know what to engage with because of that attrition rate as well.
Right. Well, one, if you've got an idea, and if you're young, old, wherever, rural, urban, doesn't matter. I can't encourage you enough to put the shoulder behind it, to see where it can go, because it's really exciting to see some of the most brilliant minds in our space And also, interestingly, from outsiders, my co-founder, he couldn't tell the difference between a sheep and a cow when he joined me. And he's this North American who brilliant guy, had been working on energy storage for the for the U.S. government and Tesla and other sort of amazing innovations. And he turned his attention to what we've been doing, and it's been such an accelerant. The vast majority, in fact, almost all of AgriWebb's technology, i.e. the engineers, the full stack software programmers, they don't have backgrounds in agriculture, but they are really passionate about engaging with a real problem and helping real people. So if you are listening and you have an idea, get into it. I'm excited. Now, the problem is you're probably going to fail. And that's awful, right? I'm sorry to tell you, but that's true. And that's just true because 99% of 99% of tech startups fail. That's just the reality. They don't have enough funding. They don't reach market. They can't get sales. They can't get traction. It's hard, right? It is not an easy thing to undertake, but it is amazing. It's better to have tried and failed than to have never tried at all. So I can't encourage you enough, and would love to connect with any people that are really driving this. And there are some fantastic, tech hubs and innovation labs and programs out there that can help you get some startup funding or some mentoring advice. So I encourage you, reach out and rip into it because it's worthwhile. And it's the only thing, frankly, that's going to move this industry really forward. So there's one. But therefore, you asked me to go, well, okay, let's dig into more like why are they failing so badly and how can we improve that? I mean, on a bigger macro scale, like venture capital funding globally, there is less than 2% of global venture capital is invested into agricultural technology. And even though it's less than 2%, that proportion has dropped by 60% over the past 2 years. As a nominal value, because there has been a global slowdown in investment, but people see a faster return from, more snappy technologies, AI, cryptocurrency, whatever, right? You name it. And the reality about AgTech and technology in our space is it is much like our industry. It moves a bit slower. Adoption rates are slower. The proof of the cycle moves a bit more slowly. The great benefit, and I say this from experience, Dave, you know this as well as I do, is that we've got the best customers in the world. I mean, I'm a terrible customer using some sort of app on my phone. If it doesn't work, bugger it, delete, off it goes. A farmer is so practical. They solve their own problems because when the tractor breaks, you fix it. You become a mechanic. When the fence goes down, you become a fencing expert. When everything breaks, and everything does break at some point, you end up being like, well, there's no one else around, so I better learn how to do it myself. And so you know how to weld, you know how to cook, you know how to fix a car, and you know how to run the accounts. And so with technology, it's been my experience that if we as tech founders build better technology and the producers actually see that, the farmers and the ag people see it, the effort, the energy, the engagement with the community, they will also reciprocate by putting effort. Right? Sure. Not everyone's wonderful, but we're seeing this. Look at Beef 24 right now, which is happening. I don't know when this will be released, but it's Beef 24 right now. You've got tens of thousands of people that are excited about innovation in the industry, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And do you think this is about, you just said that, lean in, but is it also like, because when we're in tech, you can get really, because most of the people within a company like yours or mine are super tech focused, right? Because that's a lot of the work. But like you said, to get out there and look at these things that are making your farmers, your clients, curse really, and listen to that pain and understand that pain. In other words, yes, because I see it's very easy to fall in love with how clever your technology is. But like you said, if it's not solving a real problem that's causing someone pain, it's just fun and cool. It's
Exactly. Like, and practical value trumps fun, cool, and sexy every time.
yep.
And so I think get out there and use it. Like, get your mates to use it. Get your enemies to use it. Get feedback. Get the worst kind of feedback you can, because that's steel gets stronger through tempering, and I think that's the attitude you have to take. And again, farmers are persistent people. So those that are out there listening to this, whether you're an agent, whether you're a producer yourself, whether you're within the family and you don't necessarily know if you want to get on the land, but you really want to stay connected to the space. I mean, there's so many different opportunities to drive in where you, on a day-to-day basis, you see the pain point and you go, wow, I wonder if that could be done better. Could you check water more easily? Could you, can you be Jethro Tull and work out that, because of the organ pipes, I can plant these seeds more efficiently? And, I hope that the next Jethro Tull does come from, rural Australia, and one of the listeners that is tuned into this AgriMaster program.
But I think at the end of the day, you're quite right. The all innovation. You've got this company because you were sitting around the kitchen table and you're just really annoyed about not being able to do stuff. So it's kind of like you had a bee in your bonnet, and that's quite true. You said that all innovation really starts with cursing, really, doesn't it? It's kind of like if you're annoyed by it, you're probably going to think that someone else is going to be annoyed by it, and you've just got to find enough people who have the same annoying problem as you have that need solving, really, isn't it?
You do, and also, look, I have to give credit to two key things. It's very easy for any founder to be like, oh, I had this amazing idea and it's grown. Like, whatever, ideas aren't worth anything. It's the team around you that you recruit, you motivate, and you get it. The idea is zero without the amazing team that is around AgriWebb. In my case. Everyone right the way through top to bottom. And I don't think that you'd find pretty much any one of our customers, ex-customers, future customers that hasn't had a fantastic experience speaking to one of our support people, one of our team, one of our etc. And I think that's amazing because we all have pretty awful experiences. Have you called Telstra recently to have a chat with them? And what a difference it makes when you are speaking with, like, you want these groups to win. And so I think my plea a little bit is, have some sympathy for these people that, we've built AgriWebb to be a big business, but we're still not profitable. And the only reason we are able to build these tools to help the industry is because we have investors that are putting their own money forward, and their own earned capital that they could do whatever else they want with it. This isn't just some faceless bank that's investing. Like, it's individuals that have put their own cash in, and that humbles me tremendously because we're not turning profit yet. We're trying to get towards that, but we're building tools to help tens of thousands of producers manage millions of animals. And I think when you are engaging with a lot of these companies, like, by all means, give feedback and help us get better, but also have a little bit of empathy and sympathy for, like, it's not like we're cruising out on yachts in the Mediterranean either. Like, we are also striving to produce something that will make our industry better. And I think that is something where we work together on, we'll make a real change.
And I think that's the reality. I was a farmer for 10 years, and I think I've been in software development for 25. And I'd say that and I couldn't say one's harder than the other, just being in business, period, whether you're farming in whatever area, in whatever country, or whether you're running a finance company or a software company or whatever, it's just hard work.
It's a bit of a grind, but we do it because we love it.
Yeah, and I think as long as you've got a nutty enough problem to chew on, that's what makes us good. Like, whether you be a farmer or, like us, software development, it's the solving of the problems that's where the joy comes in, really, doesn't it? Like,
it is, and the interaction with people. It's about people getting out there, seeing. Whenever I'm really frustrated, it's usually because I've been sitting too long behind a screen looking at a spreadsheet, and you always feel better. You get out, you get out on farm, you actually speak to people, you understand their stories, and how hopefully you're making a bit of a positive difference, and that gives you the energy to rip back into it.
Joe, I always reckon the biggest morale boost for our staff is when they go and have a workshop or some event with clients anywhere, and they come back fully energized. It's kind of like this little energy boost.
Yeah.
So
I mean, what is it? It's about 6:45 in Rockhampton right now. So I'd imagine using the word energized, I shiver in fear to know quite how energized the AgriWebb team is right now up in Rocky.
For anyone who's listening in from up in Rockhampton, you know what we mean.
No, I do. Yes, I think we all know what you mean up in Rocky. So I hope everyone's having fun up there.
One last, so we're recording, what month? We're in May. We're recording in May 24, whenever you're listening to this. So,
yeah.
So it might be Rockhampton 25. International expansion. Now, you have aggressively expanded internationally. So I just want one more agri-tech sort of related question here. Do you think you started up in Australia, so your head office is in Sydney, but you're now in US, UK, Latin America. Do you think now for any agri-tech, you've got to think globally to get scale in ag now, like to get that necessary scale within businesses? Because what have we got, about 80,000 farmers in Australia? So
short answer is no, I don't think. And most people would say, yes, you should immediately be thinking global and etc. I actually don't think so. I think, as you said, I think it's more like there are about 130,000 registered primary producers in Australia. Obviously, a lot of those are individual operators and etc. But when you look across all manner of production, that's what's registered. That's a pretty big market. We in Australia, we're one of the world's biggest beef producers and exporters. We are the biggest lamb exporter in the world. We're among top 5 grain exporters. We punch well above our weight for a population, and we've got some of the most diverse topology, geology, meteorology, and I think that's our blessing and our curse, right? We've got this sunburned country that the soil is just fantastic, and when it rains, if it rains, the right amount, which I've never met a farmer who's had the right amount of rain, but I think that gives an amazing opportunity, because I know your question was about ag tech, not farming, but I think that what does that do? It gives two things. One, it's a pretty big market to be able to go out and build a business and build a good company. And quite often, this Silicon Valley American perception of it's got to be huge and global in order for it to be successful. Like, it's your business, it's your idea, build it. Like if it's profitable and you're across 60% of the Aussie agriculture market, no one's going to turn around and say that's not a good business. Like, Elders is not a small business, and it's only operating, as far as I know, in the Aussie bounds. So, if you grow, Mark Allison, I think, would be pretty confident to say you can build a decent business just in Australia. So I think that you can. And it comes all back to the idea of solve problems. And I really would urge this: when you're building it, start small, super small, like with 1 or 2 trusted partners in whatever industry you're looking at, and whatever vertical, oyster farming through to horticulture, and then expand concentrically, like stick tight in that geography by going over the fence post and get a whole bunch of really strong advocates that say, yep, your product is fantastic, and I would recommend it at the pub to anyone that I met. And that's when you know you're onto something, and you can expand locally from there. Sure, you then, once you've got that really solid footprint, by all means, look internationally at where there are other opportunities. But don't do it right from the beginning, because the first thing you do when you start looking internationally is you start spreading yourself too thin. You increase your costs. The burden of building stuff in different languages and units and nomenclature, and we farm differently in insert country, right, is a pain in the ass. So don't do that off the bat. Instead, stay small, expand domestically, and then you'll be really off a fantastic footing to start leapfrogging internationally.
And growers, when they have these, so for the growers listening, and they go, okay, which ones do I engage in? What one do I? So, do you have a wish list when you're starting out that I wish you as a grower? So you came from that farming background, and you had, I suppose, yourself to experiment on to an extent, but I wish more people would engage in this way when I was little, and I only had 10 clients or 100 clients. That you as a grower, how can you help these businesses really? I don't know, prove their case to see if there is something deeper there. So at one point in the future, they may be probably the most important thing in your business, maybe.
Well, actually, our first customer is a great example of this. I mentioned my co-founder had been out on farm. We at this point we were running out of his garage in Melbourne, and we were driving out and back, and we were really trying to drag this back across the line. And I mean, I can't tell, the bloody thing didn't work. We'd pull over on the road on the way out there to try and get a Wi-Fi signal to load it. I mean, it was awful. And we spent half the day, and this was for one sale, so we knew it was loss making. But we drove out there, and it was, and we said we'd be back the next day, and we could tell. And actually, my other co-founder, John Fargo, who does come from a long background of production in north of the Flinders in South Australia, and he saw this bloke at the front gate when we get to the front drive, and he said, "Oh, this isn't good." As any of the one that's listening, you know that if you're being met at the front gate, it's not good news. You're not being invited in for tea. And so sure enough, he said, "Listen, boys, I thought about it last night, and I just don't think we can, this isn't a step that we want to take, and we should be doing good luck." So, we drove all the way back, 3 hours back to Melbourne. Not a word was said. Everyone was pretty depressed. And we thought, well, is the dream done, and et cetera. Called him the next day, the producer, and he said, "Look, I'm happy you've called, because we called just for one final, as the Americans call it, a Hail Mary attempt." And he said, "Look, I have thought about it, and I'm happy you called, because, I don't think what you're doing is solves all my problems yet. But if people like me don't get behind people like you, then this industry will never change." And he remains a customer to this day. And it was absolutely game changing, because that gave us this confidence to go, right, we can do this. Like, one person will trade, however few dollars it was for this, right? And if we can solve that next problem and solve the next problem, then, we can start to recruit more and more people. And that is what I'd say is, when I talked earlier about having some engagement with the development of this, like, be involved in the story. That's the kind of customer that is just fantastic.
Mate, brilliant. Now, I've got a couple of closing questions that I ask every customer, right? Yeah, I know. They're scary, mate. Now, look, farming myths. Now, you have got the privilege of having to experience farming in multiple continents, obviously Australia, UK, where you are now, US. What do you reckon is a question without notice, but farming myths that you see, just no matter what country you go to, there's this myth around farming that is persistent in every country, you reckon?
Oh, farmers don't like tech. I mean, what? So it comes straight off. Yeah, that's so stupid. What does that mean? Farmers don't like tech? Oh, farmers don't use tech. Oh, that's not for me. I mean, farmers are the original adopters of technology. We talked about Jethro Tull. We talked about Shears with David in the Pond. We've talked about, John Deere is one of the biggest tech companies in the world. Farmers just don't like bad tech. And so they don't have enough time for it. They're busy. And so, make sure, I think that the adoption, and that is thought of everywhere. Everyone goes, farming's Yellowstone, and Kevin Costner doesn't use a smartphone. Well, all right. I think the reality is so different, right? We are working in an industry that is increasingly demanding precision, productivity, traceability, output, reporting, all of these things. And so I think that farmers absolutely do like, want, and will embrace technology so long as it's good and it actually delivers value to them.
Brilliant. And my last question, mate, is how the hell do you switch off from all this? Like every time I talk to you, you're actually in a different country trying to, wrestle this beast with the rest of your team. So how do you switch off? I know back in the day, you used to be a rower. Do you ever get out in the water anymore, or do you?
I think as my waistline and bloody chin, it goes from my chin into my chest, will attest. No, I don't get anywhere near the boat. Wish I did. I'd probably sink it. But no, look, I'm like the best of us. Well, the best part of all of us, I'm sure, is your other half. I've got an amazing wife and an amazing family with my 2 kids, and that's everything. You get out, and I was actually teaching my 7-year-old. When I say teaching, I was at least showing him how the old man can turn his arm over, and he's just starting to play a bit of cricket. And so, just this morning, going out and bowling a few and having him turn his arm over for the first time. Well, if that doesn't give you energy to go rip into a day of work, then I don't know what will. So that's what I use for my.
Because I found with all these sports when my boys were young is that you've got to make sure you don't pull any muscles when showing them.
I need to have muscles to pull if I kick off. And I think you doing a bit of that is about everything. And as you and I have seen each other at a few different conferences, or some of the people that are listening that might know, I won't avoid having a beer. So it's probably the other channel is have a good time with your friends, your family, and when you can, then relax and have a beer and maybe appreciate where things are. It's not too bad.
Brilliant, mate. Thank you very much. We'll leave it on that note, and thank you very much for joining us on the podcast, mate.
Thank you so much for the questions, for having me on, and for those of you that listened all the way through, I commend your endurance, and I look forward to meeting some or many of you around the traps.
Good on you, mate. Thank you.